The biblical narrative starts off with Abraham coming out of Chaldea into Egypt, where his descendants would later spend 400 years. Now, from Egypt, they will go into the land of Canaan, where they will become a nation and eventually fall into captivity under the Assyrians, Babylonians, and the Persians. From Persia, they will go back into Canaan, where they would eventually have problems with the Greeks and soon after fall for the last time to the Romans. Now, what I just ran down to you was not only the biblical history of the Hebrews, but also the migrational pattern of the sacred mysteries through the Eastern world. But what are the origins of these mysteries, or where did they originally come from? In the same way that we're able to parallel the mysteries with the migration of the Hebrews after the flood, is exactly how we will follow them to their origins before the flood. To do this, I'll be pulling from the works of Augustus LaPlongeon, who spent 12 years tracing their steps back to the lands of the West. Mr. and Mrs. LaPlongeon's findings never received the attention it should have in the late 18 to early 1900s, but hopefully this will spark interest into their body of work. The sacred mysteries among the Mayans and the Quiches, 11,500 years ago, and their relations to the sacred mysteries of Egypt, Greece, Chaldea, and India, Freemasonry, in times interior to the Temple of Solomon. Starting at page 49. Seeking for the origins of the institution of the sacred mysteries, of which Masonry seemed to be the great-grandchild, following their vestiges from country to country, we have been brought over the vast expanse of the Blue Sea, to this western continent, to this mysterious lands of the West, where the souls of all good men, the Egyptians believed, dwelt among the blessed. It is therefore in that country, where Osiris was said to reign supreme, that we may expect to find the true significance of the symbols held sacred by the initiates in all countries, in all times, and which have reached us through the long vista of ages, still surrounded by the veil, well nigh impenetrable, of mystery, woven round them by their inventors. My long research among the ruins of the ancient temples and palaces of the Maya have been rewarded by learning at the fountainhead the esoteric meaning of some, at least, of the symbols. Now let's hop over to page 51. The study of the relics of ancient Mayan civilization have made manifest to my mind the source of many of the primitive traditions of mankind, which have reached us through the sacred books of the Hindus, the Chaldeans, the Egyptians, and the Jews. These, having received them from both the Chaldees and the Egyptians, have consigned the relation in the Pentateuch, a book long attributed to Moses, but now believed by Matthew Henry and other commentators who pride themselves upon their orthodoxy, to have been written in times subsequent to the foundation of the Hebrew monarchy. What we know as the Bible is a compact history of these primitive traditions as they spread across the Eastern world. The Indian, Chaldean, and Egyptian sources used to create the Bible can clearly be recognized to any religious historian, but never have these legends been traced back to the Americas as the source of all of these primitive religions. Okay, let's hop over to page 71. The heart, consequently, of that marvelous civilization was at Chichen Itza, that became a vast metropolis. In its temples, pilgrims from all parts came to worship and even offer their own persons as a sacrifice to the Almighty by throwing themselves into the sacred well from which the city took its name. There also came the wise men from afar to consult the H-Menes, learned priests, whose college still exists. Among these foreigners were bearded men whose features vividly recalled those of the Aryans of old and of the Afghans of today. From Chichen, this great civilization seemed to have extended its influence to the remotest parts of the earth and to have exercised its controlling power among far distant and heterogeneous nations. The fact is that we meet with the name Maya in many countries of Asia, Africa, and Europe, as well as the Americas, and always with the meaning of wisdom and power attached to it. Whenever we find it, there are also found vestiges of the languages, of the customs, of the religions, of the cosmological and historical traditions of the people of Maya. Many of these traditions have been recorded in the sacred books of various nations and have come to be regarded as the primitive history of mankind. But notice he said the history of the ancient Mayas. was recorded throughout all countries, and eventually those histories became the history of the entire world. This is what we're looking at when we look at the story of Adam and Eve in the Bible. The astronomy of the Mayans and other civilizations in Mesoamerica was the most complex and accurate in ancient times. Their temples and other sacred structures were designed to align with the celestial bodies and cast shadows to mark astrological events. Today at the spring equinox, thousands still flock to the temple of Kukulkan to watch the shadow of the serpent as it descends up the pyramid. Mu in the Egyptian Sphinx. Now in this work, he highlighted a story of Prince Ko and his brother Prince Ak and their sister Queen Mu, also known in Egypt as Isis, Osiris, and Set, according to Mr. LaPlungeon. But this legend is said to be the source of such stories as Bali and Maya of India and the Cain and Abel of the Bible. But I won't be going into those stories. I'll be pointing at something else that jumped off the page at me. Jump over to the appendix on page 199. It will start at the top of the page. And he's speaking about the contour or the shape of the Yucatan Peninsula. But because it was the emblem of their country, the contour of which figures a serpent with an inflated breast, like the Egyptians' Uraeus, for which reason they called it Noah Khan, the great serpent. The serpent was the emblem of Maya, as the eagle is that of the United States, the lion that of England, and the bear that of Russia, the cock that of France, etc. Judging from their descendants in our day, the ancient Maya must have been fanatical lovers of their country. The title of their rulers were Khan, serpent, as Khan is to this day that of the kings of Tartary, Burma, and other Asiatic countries, as it was that of the emperor of China, even in the days of Marco Polo, and its emblem is yet a dragon. Like the Egyptian kings, the Maya Khans were initiates to the sacred mysteries, performed in secrecy in their temples. No one has ever explained why the Asiatic rulers took upon themselves the title of Khan, or adopted the serpent for an emblem as did the Egyptian kings. Now the first thing I want to point out is the term Noah Khan. Noah Khan. This was the emblem and the name of the Mayan country of the Yucatan. Also in that region exists an ethnic group called the Nahua, in which the Aztecs are believed to descend from. Now, if you go to a concordance, go to H5146 and you'll get Noah. It is pronounced Noach. Noah or Noach. Either way, in the Bible, he represents the great Khans or the serpent kings who evacuated from the west to the eastern world during the time of the flood. Next, we have Khan, right? So Cain and Canaan in the Bible basically represent the Khans, the children of Noah, the great Khan. Notice how they say that the initiates to the sacred mysteries of the Mayans were called Khan. The Hebrews called their initiated priests Kohan or Kohen, which is a rendition of the Khans. Noah, Ham, Shem, Japheth, and Canaan represent the Khans or the serpent kings, also known as the Nagas. Starting on page 1. In ages long lost in the abyss of time, when Aryan colonists had not yet established their first settlements on the banks of the river Saraswati in the Punjab, and the primitive Egyptian settlers in the valley of the Nile did not fancy even their most hopeful daydreams that their descendants would become the great people whose civilization was to be the cradle of that of Europe. There existed on the western continent a nation, the Maya, that had attained to a high degree of culture in arts and science. Valmiki, in his beautiful epic, the Ramayana, which is said to have served as model to Homer's Iliad, tells us that the Mayans were mighty navigators, whose ships traveled from the western to the eastern ocean, from the southern and northern seas, in ages so remote that the sun had not yet risen above the horizon. That being likewise great warriors, they conquered the southern parts of Hindustan and established themselves there. That being also learned architects, they built great cities and palaces. These Mayans became known in aftertime under the names of Divanas and are regarded by modern historians as aborigines of the country, or Nagas, as we shall see later on. Of these, J. Talboys Wheeler, in his History of India, says the traditions of the Nagas are obscure in the extreme. They point, however, to the existence of an ancient Naga empire in the Deccan, having its capital in the modern town of Nagapur. And it may be conjectured that prior to the Aryan invasion, the Naga Rajas exercised an imperial power over the greatest part of the Punjab in Hindustan. The Nagas are serpent worshippers who lived in crowded cities and were famous for their beautiful women and exhausted treasures. Now, this brings to mind Abraham and his wife Sarah. He thought that the Egyptians would kill him and take his wife because she was so beautiful. They were doubtless a civilized people living under an organized government. Indeed, if any reference can be drawn from the epic legends, it would be that prior to the Aryan conquest, the Naga Rajas were ruling powers who had cultivated the arts of luxury to an extraordinary degree, and yet succeeded in maintaining a protracted struggle against the Aryan invaders. Like the English of today, the Mayas sent colonists all over the earth. These carried with them the languages, the traditions, the agriculture, the astronomy, and cosmogony, and other sciences, in a word, the civilization of their mother country. And this is basically what the ancient mysteries is all about. It's nothing more but the culture of the antediluvians that was preserved by Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and now being spread in the Eastern world. It is this civilization that furnishes us with the means of ascertaining the role played by them in the universal history of the world. We find vestiges of it in all their languages, in all historical nations of antiquity, in Asia, Africa, and Europe. And the sons of Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth represent the originators of these mysteries in these countries of Asia, Africa, and Europe. Back to the appendix on page 184 that brings us to the next stop on our list as we follow the ancient mysteries through the narrative of the Bible. The Brahmins, it is well known, borrowed their system of cosmogony and acquired their knowledge of astronomy, as well as all other sciences in the arts of civilization, from the Nagas, whom afterwards they relentlessly persecuted. What I want to point out here is that the Brahmins learned their wisdom from the Nagas. So we have the Nagas bringing it over, and the Nagas now passing it over to the Brahmins, which in our biblical narrative is when Abraham come into play. Now from here, Abraham go into Egypt. So let's prove that the Nagas was in Egypt. Exodus, the 3rd chapter, I'm going to start at the 6th verse. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people, which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. Here's wisdom. We go to the concordance and trace the taskmasters to H5065, and that word is Nagas. So the taskmasters in Egypt were the Nagas. This is why the Egyptians had the sacred serpent on their headdress. Going back to the sacred mysteries, we're going to jump over to page 32, and we're going to continue to follow the mysteries in this biblical timeline. I'm going to start at that 2nd paragraph. But with respect to the ancient sacred mysteries, the query arises as to where they originated. We know that from Egypt and Chaldea, they were brought to Greece and Rome. And from whom did the Egyptians and Chaldeans receive them? The Brahmins assert that the Magi and the Hierophants were their disciples. So we see that it was the Nagas who educated the Brahmins. Next, we have the Chaldeans and the Egyptians who taught the Greeks and the Romans. And finally, the Persians got their wisdom from the Brahmins. These are all the main characters in the biblical narrative, and these are also civilizations that are known for their versions of the sacred mysteries. Now I want to jump over and pull from The Veil of Isis by Mrs. Blavatsky. As for affiliation goes, we agree with this pious writer, and we feel every day is certain that some of the peoples of Central America will be traced back to the Phoenicians and the Mosaic Israelites. So we have another witness in Mrs. Blavatsky, who is certain that at some point, the people of Central America will be traced back to the Phoenicians and the Mosaic Israelites. If Brasseur de Bourbourg and the Cavalier des Musos had so much at heart to trace the identity of the Mexicans with the Canaanites, they might have found far better and weightier proofs than by showing both the accursed descendants of Ham. So what Ms. Blavatsky is saying in a nutshell is that there's much more proof that these Canaanites trace back to ancient Americas than there is proof that they're supposed to be cursed. The perfect identity of the rites, ceremonies, traditions, and even the names of the deities amongst the Mexicans and ancient Babylonians and Egyptians are a sufficient proof of South America being peopled by a colony which mysteriously found its way across the Atlantic. But when and at what period? History is silent on that point. But those who consider that there is no tradition sanctified by ages without a certain sentiment of truth at the bottom of it believe in the Atlantis legend. Now I want to go to a work titled History of Ancient America, Anterior to the Time of Columbus, proving the identity of the Aborigines with the Tyranians and Israelites, and the introduction of Christianity into the Western world by the Apostle St. Thomas, by George Jones. How many of you knew that it was the Apostle Thomas who brought Christianity into the Western world? Now, of course, this portion of the book was not in my copy, but could the Apostle St. Thomas, one of the original 12 disciples, have actually come over into the Western Hemisphere and brought Christianity? Now, on page 27, he's basically outlining what he's going to prove in the book. And the fourth point that he says he's going to prove is that the Aborigines of Mexican America and the West Indian Islands were the ancient Tyrians of Phoenicia, and that they landed on the Western continent from their native country more than 2,000 years ago. This is confirmed by tradition, analogies, history, and prophecy. This work has over 400 pages dedicated to proving the identity of the ancient Mexicans with that of the Canaanites. He'll also point out the many temples throughout the Yucatan Peninsula. This will shed light on why Solomon chooses Zidonians, who were Canaanites, to design and build his temple. So you might be wondering, how did they get here, or who showed them the route? These are known as ocean gyres. Now, if you notice, there's an arrow moving in a circular motion between Africa and South America. Also notice the arrows on the back side of Mexico pointing directly to Asia. All one would have to do is have knowledge of the currents, and you'll be able to pretty much travel the entire world, which is what the ancient Americans did. Also notice the two arrows coming from the Yucatan Peninsula. There's an arrow pointing into the Gulf of Mexico, pointing directly at the Mississippi River. And there's another that veer to the right and swing around Florida and up the eastern coast of North America, showing how easy it would be for these ancient Americans to go back and forth into those southern states of North America. These highly intelligent people, who were responsible for bringing high civilization to nations such as Egypt, India, and Chaldea, was later deemed savages by Rome, who in reality was a student and benefited from their vast culture. Look at how much they were inspired. To your left, you have St. Peter's Basilica, which was completed in 1626 in our common era. And to the right, you have the Temple of the Sun and Moon, which are part of the ancient American ruins. Now let me explain what I mean by Hebrew Mayans. The word Hebrew traces back to H5680 Ibri, and it means one from beyond. Also in the etymology brackets to the right, it traces back to H5677 Eber and H5676, also H5674 Ibar, meaning to pass over or to cross. It traces back to H4325, and it is Mayin or Maya plural. So a Hebrew Mayan is one who crossed over from beyond the waters. Your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood in old times, even Terah, the father of Abraham, the father of Nahor, and they served other gods. You see, the story of the Hebrews is that Abraham was chosen, and the promise of reclaiming the ancient homeland of Adam, Enoch, and Noah was to his descendants. The children of Israel were supposed to destroy the worship of Baal and human sacrifices and reestablished the 12 sacred orders of Atlantis and the priest-king office of Melchizedek. But instead they proved to be the sons of their fathers by committing the same whoredoms. So as the scripture says, the curses was poured out on them, and their offspring was reduced to servitude. Leviticus the 26th, 43rd verse read, "The land left of them shall enjoy her Sabbaths, while she lie desolate, and they shall accept the punishment of their iniquity, because they despise my judgments, and their soul abhorred my statutes." Isaiah chapter 58 verse 12 read, "And those that be of you shall build the old waste places, and shall rise up the foundation of many generations. And you shall be called the repairers of the breach, and the restorer of paths to walk in." The conspiracy in Psalms 83 came way too close to working, but all praises to the Most High. What's hidden in the dark is now coming to the light.